For at least another 100 years, we must pretend that fair is foul and foul is fair, for foul is useful and fair is not. Avarice and usury and precaution must be our gods for a little longer, for only they can lead us out of the tunnel of necessity into daylight.
Capitalism is necessary to bring us out of the tunnel of necessity into the sunlight of abundance. That's a phrase from the Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren.
When we get to the state of abundance, we shall be able to rid ourselves of many of the pseudo-moral principles which have hag-ridden us. I'm sorry, there's political incorrectness. Hag-ridden us, by which we have exalted some of the most distasteful of human qualities into the highest virtues. We shall be able to assess the money motive at its true value. The love of money as a possession, as distinguished from the love of money as a means to the enjoyment and realities of life, will be recognized for what it is, a somewhat disgusting morbidity, one of those semi-criminal, semi-pathological tendencies which one hands over with a shudder to specialists in mental disease. But that's when we've solved the problem. But beware, the time for all this is not yet. For at least another 100 years, we must pretend that fair is foul and foul is fair, for foul is useful and fair is not. Avarice and usury and precaution must be our gods for a little longer, for only they can lead us out of the tunnel of necessity into daylight.
I think the other thing which is very interesting about Keynes's utopia is that it has some resemblance to Marx's utopia. It's a utopia after capitalism rather than outside capitalism as the traditional utopias were. Because the whole of economics is based on the notion of scarcity. And all its axioms, optimizing individuals and stable preferences and all these things are actually based, especially the first one, on scarcity, the scarcity axiom.
Theories of international trade depend fundamentally on that for their conclusions.
So what happens when scarcity is no longer the most important driver of human behavior or economic behavior? And this was the subject of a fascinating little essay Keynes wrote, which I think has inspired me. It's inspired me quite a bit, called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. I would single out two. First of all, markets are not very stable. They're liable to crash. Especially that's true of investment markets. And secondly, when they do, and as a result of their crashing economies run down, the governments have a duty to provide a stimulus in order to break the fall and to promote recovery, because the markets won't do that themselves. So I think those are two basic features of Keynesian economics.
Now going back to the Archbishop, in a recent essay, he called for a proper discussion of what wealth is for. Why is growth seen as the Holy Grail? Economics, he says, claims to have unearthed a particular theory of law of motivation which trumps everything else, that of self-interest. Rational self-interest underlies Adam Smith's invisible hand, but economic exchange, and then I'm quoting the Archbishop, is only one of the things that people do. And that's a very important phrase that he uses, only one of the things that people do. And then he says, why are we here? And he says it's to lead good and admirable lives. And the quest for wealth has only a limited connection with that. Moreover, maximization of wealth also calls for qualities which are the reverse of what is needed for goodness. So we must recover the courage to speak about these things, to speak about wealth and the pursuit of wealth in a moral and ethical framework. Now, both Smith and Keynes did that. I mean, with Smith, for him, economic life wasn't just one of the things we do. It was the main thing we do. And it's the main thing we do because of the universal condition of scarcity, what he called indigence. And so basically self-interest was something that was prime because it helped us solve this problem of self-interest. It wasn't just self-interest, there was also what he called sympathy. But indigence and necessity are the spur for improvement. Saving or parsimony comes to us from the womb. Self-interest is the motor of improvement, and it produces private property, which is the basis of the accumulation of capital and the division of labor. But it also, produces other things. Commerce and the arts of exchange come out of the quest for wealth. They make men sociable, and sociability is the basis of morality. Anyway, so you get this base superstructure sort of idea in Smith with self-interest as at the base, as necessary to get people out of poverty. Thus, the progress in civilization depends on progress in opulence. Opulence is produced by self-interest mediated by sympathy. Self-interest is innate, but sympathy is learned from the experience of living with other people. Now, interestingly, Smith didn't tell us what he thought life would be like after opulence was reached. I think he probably did have his utopia, but he did believe that it was the material progress of mankind which created intellectual and aesthetic appetites. So we must assume that Smith thought that one day economic life would simply become one of the things we do, as the Archbishop said, but it hadn't yet, that stage hadn't yet been reached. Now to Keynes, and I just want to take one strand of Keynes here, which is something I've been thinking about and working about recently, and that's his little essay, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. Keynes did speculate on what life would or should be when we'd reached a state of abundance. And he thought we were very close to it. This was written in 1930. His premise was that capital growth and improvements in technology were putting us within sight of solving the economic problem, at least in the West. A standard of living 8 times as high as in 1930 would be achievable within 100 years with a fraction of the effort, with the fraction of the hours that people then worked. Most work, in other words, would be done by machines. And so we would soon be in a position to abandon the morality born of scarcity. In other words, Smith's morality. With the economic problem solved, the Gradgrinds of the world will yield their places, and I quote Keynes, to the delightful people who are capable of taking direct enjoyment in things, the lilies of the field who toil not, neither do they spin. And significantly, Keynes said that once this point had been reached, we would be free to adopt the sure and certain principles of religion and traditional virtue. In other words, self-interest would be irrelevant at that point. In an era of abundance, like justice, self-interest would no longer make sense. And so the whole basis of our institutions would have to be transformed, and we would all suffer a nervous breakdown. Society as a whole. Now, in a sense, you might say, well, Keynes was simply following on from Adam Smith, only he was 150 years later, and the world had just become much more opulent than it was in Adam Smith's day. But there was one enormous difference from Adam Smith. Keynes did not see capitalism as benign, only as necessary. He was much more influenced by Mandeville and his fable of the bees. Mandeville's account of capitalism as a system which hypocritically turned vices into virtues. And he had little sympathy for Adam Smith's attempt to soften self-interest by the notion of sympathy. He would have agreed with Smith's contemporary Thomas Reid, who called Smith's philosophy of sympathy a delusive device for wrapping up selfishness in impartiality. So for Keynes, capitalism's only redeeming feature was that it got us to abundance. And for that we had to pay a very heavy price.